The silk of my son's wedding invitation was a shade of cream I had only ever seen in dreams, or perhaps in the high-end boutiques I spent my life scrubbing floors outside of. But I wasn't holding an invitation. I was holding a crumpled flyer I had found in the trash near my ex-wife's manor, a discarded map to a celebration I was never meant to attend. Welcome to Dr. Harmony. Today's story is a harrowing journey through the shadows of a father's love, a son's ultimate betrayal, and a web of lies that took 20 years to spin. If you've ever felt invisible to the people you love most, this story is for you. Stay with us until the very end, because the truth hidden in a tattered envelope changed everything. Now, let us begin the story of a man who gave his soul to a family that traded him for a gold-plated upgrade. The sun beat down on my weathered neck as I stood across the street from the Grand Palace Hotel. My suit was nearly 20 years old, the fabric thinning at the elbows, smelling faintly of mothballs and the small, damp basement apartment I called home. I looked at my hands, calloused, scarred, and permanently stained with the grease of the machines I had spent decades fixing, just to send checks to a son who didn't want my name. My son Min was getting married today. He was marrying into a family of titans, a world of ivory towers and crystal chandeliers. And I, the man who had carried him on my shoulders through the floods of our old village, was standing behind a parked car like a thief in the night. I remembered the day his mother, Lan, left me. She didn't leave because I was cruel. She left because I was stagnant. She found a man who didn't have grease under his fingernails, a man whose hands were soft and whose bank account was loud. She took Min with her, promising him a life where he would never have to sweat for a meal. For years, I watched from the sidelines as my son was molded into a stranger. His letters became shorter, then turned into emails, and then silence. Every cent I saved, every extra shift I took at the factory, I sent to him. I thought I was buying a bridge back to his heart. I didn't realize I was just funding a lifestyle that would eventually make him ashamed of me. In my pocket, I felt the weight of the small wooden box. It wasn't much, not compared to the Rolexes or the keys to luxury cars he was likely receiving inside that ballroom. It was a watch, an heirloom passed down from my grandfather, the only thing of value I owned, but I had spent 6 months' salary having it restored, wanting to give him something that held our bloodline's history. As I approached the heavy glass doors of the hotel, the doorman looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. He saw a beggar in a cheap suit. He didn't see a father. "Sir, this is a private event," the doorman said, stepping firmly in my path. "I'm the father," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm Min's father." The doorman scoffed, checking his digital list. "The groom's father is Mr. Victor Huang. He's already inside. Please move along before I call security." Victor Huang, the second husband. The man who had bought my son's loyalty with sports cars and Ivy League tuition. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold iron hand. I didn't want trouble. I just wanted to see him. I pushed past the doorman, my desperation giving me a strength I didn't know I had. I ran toward the ballroom, the sound of a string quartet growing louder, the scent of expensive lilies filling the air. I saw him then, Min. He looked magnificent in a tailored tuxedo, laughing as he toasted with a group of men who looked like they owned the world. Lan was there too, draped in diamonds that sparkled like the tears I was trying to hold back. When Min's eyes met mine, the laughter didn't just stop, it evaporated. His face turned a ghostly pale, followed quickly by a flush of deep, burning anger. He didn't run to me. He didn't hug me. He walked toward me with the stride of a man approaching a nuisance. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice a low venom. "I told you never to come to my new life. Look at you. You're embarrassing me in front of everyone who matters." "Min, I just wanted to give you this," I whispered, holding out the wooden box. "It's your grandfather's. It's for your wedding." He didn't even look at the box. He looked at the guests who were now whispering, watching the ragged man confront the golden groom. I have a father, and he's standing over there, Min said, pointing to Victor. You're just a mistake my mother made 20 years ago. Get out, now, before I have you dragged out. The world tilted. The son I had starved for, the boy I had protected, was looking at me as if I were a stain on his expensive carpet. He didn't see the man who worked 18-hour days. He saw a poor man who threatened his social standing. When I didn't move fast enough, he signaled to two large men in suits. "Get this intruder out of here," he commanded. As they grabbed my arms, the wooden box fell from my hands. It clattered on the floor, the lid popping open. The watch skated across the marble. Min didn't even flinch. He turned his back on me, returning to his bride as if I were nothing more than a bad memory. They dragged me through the lobby and threw me onto the sidewalk. The cold concrete felt more honest than the warmth of that ballroom. I sat there for a long time, the rain beginning to fall, mixing with the grime of the city. I didn't cry. I felt something deeper than sadness. I felt a finality. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out the letter I'd written, the letter that contained the truth about Victor, about the money and about the sacrifice that had been kept a secret for 2 decades. I walked back to the door, handed the letter to a young waitress who looked at me with kind eyes and asked her to give it to the groom after the cake was cut. Then I walked away. The rain began to soak through my thin suit jacket, but I didn't feel the cold. All I felt was a hollow vibration in my chest, the kind you feel when a building is demolished right in front of you. I walked toward the bus station, my footsteps heavy on the pavement. Behind me, the music from the Grand Palace Hotel faded into the hum of the city traffic. To the world, I was just another broken man, wandering the streets. To my son, I was a ghost he had finally exorcised. But the ghosts of the past have a way of speaking louder than the living, and the letter I left behind was about to scream. I sat on a metal bench at the station, watching the reflection of the neon signs in the puddles. My mind drifted back to the years when Lan and I were first married. We were poor, yes, but I thought we were happy. We lived in a small house with a tin roof that sang during the monsoon season. I worked at the docks, lifting crates until my back felt like it would snap. All so I could bring home a small toy for Min or a ribbon for Lan's hair. I remembered the way Min used to cling to my leg when I came home, his face smeared with dirt and joy. "Papa is home!" he would yell. That voice was gone now, replaced by the cold, sharp tongue of a man who had been taught to value the price of a suit over the value of a soul. The betrayal didn't start at the wedding. It started 20 years ago, the day Lan met Victor Huang. Victor wasn't a titan of industry then. He was a mid-level manager with a silver tongue and a knack for spotting people's insecurities. Lan was beautiful and tired. Tired of the heat, tired of the struggle, tired of me. Victor promised her a world of air-conditioned rooms and silk sheets, but there was a catch. Victor didn't want the baggage of a struggling ex-husband hovering around his new trophy wife. So they crafted a narrative. They told Min that I had abandoned them. They told him that the money that came every month, the money I bled for, was a stipend from Victor's charity fund. I remember the day I went to their new mansion to see my son for his 10th birthday. I had saved for a year to buy him a bicycle. When I reached the gates, Lan met me outside. She didn't let me in. She stood there in a dress that cost more than my house and told me that if I truly loved Min, I would stay away. "He's starting to fit in here," she had whispered, her eyes devoid of any guilt. "If he sees you, he'll remember where he came from. He'll feel small." Do you want your son to feel small, or do you want him to be a king? She made me believe that my presence was a poison. For the sake of his future, I stepped back. I let Victor play the father. I let him take the credit for the man Min was becoming. But what Min didn't know, what Lan had carefully hidden, was that Victor's empire was built on sand. 10 years into their marriage, Victor's investments collapsed. He was a gambler, a man who played with other people's dreams. They were on the verge of losing everything. Lan had come to me in secret, weeping in a dark corner of a coffee shop. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She asked for my life savings. She told me that if the house was seized, Min would be pulled out of his prestigious university. He would lose his status, his friends, his future. And so I did the only thing a fool in love with his child could do. I sold my land. I sold the small workshop I had finally managed to open. I gave her everything, and I signed a contract that forbade me from ever telling Min where the money came from. I watched from the shadows as Victor took the credit for saving the family. I watched Min graduate, his chest puffed out with pride for his successful stepfather. Every time I tried to send a hint of the truth, Lan would threaten to cut me off from Min entirely. I was a phantom donor, a man paying for his own erasure. As I sat in that bus station, I realized that the wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was the final seal on the lie. Min was marrying into a family even wealthier than Victor's, a move that would finally secure Victor's failing finances for good. I was the only loose thread in their perfect tapestry. I looked at the bus schedule. The next bus was heading north, far away from the city, to a small village where no one knew my name or my shame. I had a few $100s in my pocket, and a heart that was finally, mercifully, turning to stone. I thought about the letter the waitress was holding. In it, I didn't beg for his love. I didn't ask for an apology. I simply laid out the bank records, the sale of the land, and the original letters from Lan, begging for the money to keep their rich life from crumbling. I included the receipts for his tuition that had my thumbprint on the corner. I wanted him to know, as he toasted to his bright future, that every step he took on that marble floor was paid for by the sweat of the man he had just called a mistake. I wanted him to see that his hero Victor was a fraud who had survived on the charity of a mechanic. The bus pulled into the station, hissing steam into the rainy night. I stood up, leaving my old life on that metal bench. As I climbed the stairs of the bus, I didn't look back at the hotel lights. I knew that in a few hours the cake would be cut, the toasts would be finished, and my son would open that envelope. The truth is a heavy gift, and I was finally giving it to him, whether he wanted it or not. The bus engine groaned as it pulled away from the curb, a jarring sound that echoed the turmoil in my soul. I leaned my head against the cold, vibrating window, watching the city lights blur into long, distorted streaks of yellow and white. I was leaving behind the only world I knew, a world where I had been a silent guardian, a shadow donor to a son who saw me as a stain. I thought about the waitress. I hoped she was brave. I hoped she didn't lose that envelope in the chaos of the trays and the champagne. That letter wasn't just paper. It was the skin of my back, the years of my life, and the brutal reality that had been polished over with Lan's lies. Back at the Grand Palace Hotel, the air was likely thick with the scent of expensive cigars and the clinking of fine china. I could almost see them, the elite, the powerful, all nodding in approval, as Victor Huang took the stage. Victor, the man who wore my sacrifice like a designer suit. He would be giving a speech about hard work and family legacy, his voice booming with the false authority of a man who had never known the sting of a hunger cramp. He would look at Min with a pride he hadn't earned, and Min would look back with the adoration of a disciple. It was a play, a grand theater production, where I had been cast as the villain, and they were the shining protagonists. I remembered a moment from 5 years ago, a small, sharp memory that cut through the fog of my thoughts. I had seen Min at a distance in a shopping mall. He was with a group of friends, all of them dressed in labels I couldn't pronounce. I had instinctively moved toward him, my heart leaping with a father's reflex. But then I caught my reflection in a shop window next to him. I saw my cracked shoes, my stained trousers, and the way my shoulders hunched from years of heavy lifting. I saw the way his friends looked at a janitor nearby with such casual dismissal that it felt like a physical blow. I had stopped in my tracks. I realized then that I wasn't just a different class. I was a different species to them. If I had approached him, he wouldn't have seen his father. he would have seen a threat to his carefully curated identity. I had turned away that day too. I had always been turning away for his sake, but today, he had turned me away, and that was the difference. As the bus reached the outskirts of the city, the skyscrapers were replaced by the jagged silhouettes of industrial warehouses and dark fields. I felt a strange sense of lightness, a terrifying freedom. For 20 years, every decision I made was for Min. What should I eat? Whatever is cheapest so I can save for Min. Where should I live? Somewhere small, so I can send more to Min. My identity had been entirely consumed by a one-sided devotion. Now, that cord was cut. He had severed it with his own words. I have a father, and he's standing over there. The words played on a loop in my mind, a cruel melody that wouldn't stop. Inside the ballroom, the festivities were reaching their peak. The father-son dance was likely happening, a moment meant for me, stolen by a man who had spent my money to buy my son's love. I wondered if Lan felt a single prick of conscience as she watched them. Did she remember the nights we spent in our small village house, planning a future that didn't involve gold-leafed invitations? Or had she successfully scrubbed her memory as clean as her new social status? She was the architect of this tragedy. She knew that a son's love for his father is a foundation, and she had systematically dismantled that foundation brick by brick, replacing it with the hollow pillars of wealth and prestige. The waitress, a young woman named Elena, who worked the late-night shifts to pay for her mother's medicine, felt the weight of the envelope in her apron pocket. She had seen the way the old man was treated. She had seen the raw, naked pain in his eyes as he was shoved toward the exit. She wasn't like the other staff. She hadn't yet been numbed by the arrogance of the wealthy. She watched the groom, the handsome man who seemed to have everything, and she felt a deep, unsettling intuition. The old man didn't look like a beggar. He looked like a martyr. She waited for the right moment, the moment when the music slowed and the guests began to drift toward the dessert tables. She saw Min standing alone for a brief second near the balcony. Looking out over the city he thought he conquered. His expression wasn't one of joy, but of a man who had finally achieved a difficult task. Marriage wasn't love to him. It was an acquisition. Elena approached him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew that if she was caught giving him unauthorized mail, she could be fired, but the look on the old man's face haunted her. "Mr. Min?" she whispered, stepping into his line of sight. He looked at her with the same cold indifference he had shown me. "What is it?" "I have a drink coming." "A man, the man from earlier," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He asked me to give this to you. He said it was the only gift he had left." She thrust the envelope into his hand and vanished back into the crowd before he could protest. Min looked down at the tattered, stained paper. It looked like trash against his white silk gloves. His first instinct was to crumple it and toss it into the champagne bucket. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was a flicker of the boy who used to wait by the gate for his father. Or perhaps it was the sheer audacity of the man to send something after being humiliated. He tore the edge of the envelope, his movements sharp and annoyed. He didn't know that the paper he was holding was about to set his entire world on fire. Min stepped further into the shadows of the balcony, away from the prying eyes of the high society guests and the blinding flashbulbs of the photographers. He pulled the contents from the envelope, expecting a rambling plea for money or a guilt-ridden poem. Instead, his fingers brushed against cold, hard evidence. There were bank statements from a small branch in our old province. Rows and rows of numbers that didn't make sense at first. Then, he saw the names. Every single month for 15 years, a deposit had been made into an account controlled by his mother. The sender wasn't a corporate entity or a trust fund. The sender was me. He unfolded a yellowed piece of paper, a handwritten letter from his mother, Lan, dated 8 years ago. The handwriting was unmistakable. the sharp, elegant loops she used when she wanted something. "I know you've already given us everything from the land sale," the letter read, "but Victor needs another 50,000 or the creditors will come to the house. If Min finds out we're broke, he'll lose his focus at the university. Do you want him to drop out? Do you want him to end up like you? Send the money to the usual account. Don't contact him. It's for his own good." Min felt a cold sweat break out across his brow. He looked at the dates. This was the year he had been told Victor had won a major contract that paid for his final year of law school. He remembered the celebration, the expensive steak dinner, the way Victor had patted him on the back and told him that a Huang man always provides. Now, the paper in his hand told a different story. It told the story of a father who was being bled dry in the dark, while a charlatan took the bows in the light. He flipped to the next document. It was a copy of a property deed, the small plot of land our family had owned for generations. It was the land where I had taught him how to fly a kite, the land where his grandfather was buried. It had been sold for a fraction of its value in a fire sale to a local developer. The date coincided exactly with the purchase of Min's first luxury car. The car Victor had presented to him as a reward for excellence. The music from the ballroom seemed to distort, the violins sounding like a shrill, mocking laugh. Min looked back into the room. He saw Victor laughing with the bride's father, a man of immense political influence. Victor looked every bit the successful patriarch, his chest out, his hands gesturing expansively. Beside him, Lan was smiling, her eyes fixed on the jewelry of the other women, her expression one of hard-won triumph. To Min, they suddenly looked like actors on a stage that was rotting beneath their feet. Every luxury he had ever enjoyed, every boast he had ever made about his self-made family, was built on the bones of the man he had just kicked out into the rain. He remembered the look in my eyes before the security guards grabbed me. It wasn't the look of a crazy man or a jealous ex-husband. It was the look of a man who had come to witness the final result of his life's work, only to be told he didn't exist. He thought about the wooden box that had fallen on the floor. He remembered the glimpse of the watch, the silver face, the scratched crystal. It was the watch he used to play with as a child, the one I told him would be his one day when he became a man. He had stepped over it as if it were a piece of gravel. A sudden sharp nausea rose in his throat. He realized that his entire identity, his pride, his arrogance, his disdain for the poor, was a poison fed to him by the two people he trusted most. He wasn't the prince of a dynasty. He was the son of a hard-working man who had been used as a silent ATM. He looked at the final page in the envelope. It wasn't a bank record. It was a note from me, written in the shaky hand of a man who had worked too many hours and slept too little. "Min," the note read, "I am not coming back this time. I have given you my past, my present, and my future. I saw you today, and I saw that you have become the man your mother wanted you to be. You are rich, you are powerful, and you are untroubled by the truth. I hope your new life is worth the price I paid for it. The watch on the floor was the last thing I had to give. Happy wedding, my son. I won't embarrass you again." Min's hand shook so violently that the papers fluttered. The intruder wasn't a stranger. The mistake wasn't me. It was the lie he had been living. He turned toward the ballroom doors, his mind racing. He needed to find his mother. He needed to confront Victor. But more than anything, he felt a desperate, clawing need to find the man in the thinning suit. He looked at the rain outside, the dark streets where I had disappeared. The luxury of the ballroom suddenly felt like a tomb. He realized that in his rush to be somebody, he had destroyed the only person who had ever truly loved him without a price tag attached. He began to move, not toward the stage but toward the exit, ignoring his bride's confused call and the shocked whispers of the guests. The golden boy was finally waking up, but the nightmare was just beginning. Min burst through the double doors of the ballroom, the heavy oak swinging back with a thud that silenced a dozen conversations. He wasn't the composed, elegant groom who had walked down the aisle an hour ago. His hair was disheveled, his silk tie was loosened, and in his hand he clutched the crumpled papers like a weapon. He didn't head for the bar or the balcony. He headed straight for the head table, where Lan and Victor sat like royalty, basking in the glow of their successful deception. Lan saw him first. Her smile faltered, her sharp eyes instantly landing on the yellowed papers in his hand. She knew that color. She knew that texture. It was the ghost of her past coming to claim her in the middle of her greatest triumph. "Min, darling, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice tight with a warning. "Everyone is looking. The photographers." "Let them look!" Min roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and fury. He threw the bank statements onto the table, right into the middle of a plate of expensive hors d'oeuvres. A glass of vintage champagne tipped over, the gold liquid soaking into the records of my life's work. "Tell me about this, Mother. Tell me about the charity fund that paid for my car. Tell me about the business deals that paid for my law degree." Victor stood up, his face a mask of practiced calm, though a vein began to throb in his temple. "Min, you've had too much to drink. This is your wedding night. Don't make a scene over some nonsense." He reached for Min's arm, but Min shoved him back, a shove that contained 20 years of misplaced loyalty and sudden agonizing realization. "Don't touch me," Min hissed. "I saw him, Victor. I saw the man you called a mistake. I saw the man you had thrown out like trash. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me that every time you patted yourself on the back for providing for us, you were actually cashing checks from a man who was fixing engines in a basement?" The room went deathly silent. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. The bride, beautiful and confused in her lace gown, walked toward them, her voice trembling. "Min, what's happening? Who are you talking about?" Min turned to her, his eyes red. "I'm talking about my father. My real father, not this fraud." He pointed a shaking finger at Victor. "My father is the man who sold his father's land so I could drive a luxury car. He's the man who lived in a shack so I could live in a mansion. And tonight, I treated him like a dog. We all did." Lan stood up then, her grace replaced by a cold, desperate pragmatism. "I did it for you, Min. Do you think you would be standing here, marrying into this family? If you were the son of a grease monkey, you would be nothing. I gave you a name, I gave you a future. I protected you from the shame of being poor." "You didn't protect me from shame, Mother," Min said, tears finally spilling over. "You created it. You taught me to hate the only thing that was real in my life. You turned me into a monster who couldn't recognize his own father's face because he didn't like the suit he was wearing." He looked at the guests, the elite of the city, the people he had spent his life trying to impress. They were whispering now, their eyes darting between the successful Hoangs and the evidence of their bankruptcy. The scandal was spreading like wildfire. Victor's face turned from pale to a deep bruised purple. He knew that his reputation, the only thing he truly valued, was disintegrating in seconds. The father of the bride stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Victor, is this true? Is your empire built on the back of a laborer's savings?" Victor opened his mouth to lie, but the words died in his throat. The bank statements were there, clear as day. The signatures of the land sale were undeniable. The play was over. The curtain had fallen, and the actors were left standing in the dark. Min didn't wait for an answer. He turned away from the table, away from his mother's pleas. and away from the hollow life he had built. He ran toward the exit, his shoes clicking loudly on the marble floor. He didn't care about the wedding cake, the guests, or the $1 million dowry. He only cared about the man in the rain. He burst through the hotel lobby, ignoring the doorman who had shoved me earlier. He ran out into the street, the cold rain soaking his tuxedo instantly. "Dad!" he screamed into the night. "Dad!" But the street was empty. The city was a labyrinth of shadows and neon, and I was long gone. He ran to the corner, where I had been thrown, searching the ground. There, near the gutter, he saw a glimmer of silver. He knelt in the grime, his expensive trousers soaking up the dirty water, and picked up the watch. The glass was cracked, the strap was worn, but the heart of it was still beating. He pressed the watch to his forehead and sobbed. A sound so raw it drowned out the noise of the city. He had found the gift. But he had lost the giver, and for the first time in his life, Min understood that some debts can never be repaid with money, especially when the person you owe them to has finally stopped waiting for you to notice. Min clutched the cracked watch so tightly the metal edges bit into his palm. The rain was a deluge now, a cold, indifferent curtain that washed away the expensive cologne and the arrogance he had worn like armor. He looked up and down the boulevard, his eyes searching every shadow, every bus stop, every hunched figure seeking shelter. He realized, with a jolt of terror, that he didn't even know where I lived. In 20 years, he had never once asked for my address. He had never wondered where the man who sent the money laid his head at night. To Min, I had been a ghost with a checkbook, a distant memory he was encouraged to suppress. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling so much he nearly dropped it. He called his mother. She answered on the first ring, her voice a frantic, high-pitched mess of excuses. "Min, where are you? Come back inside. We can fix this. We can tell them it was a misunderstanding, a disgruntled relative." "Where does he live, Mom?" Min's voice was dead, hollowed out by the realization of his own cruelty. "Who cares where he lives? He's probably in some slum. Min, think about your bride. Think about the Huang name." "The Huang name is a lie!" Min screamed into the phone, his voice echoing off the glass towers of the business district. "Give me his address, or I swear to God, you will never see me again. I will walk into the ocean before I spend another second in your house." There was a long silence on the other end, broken only by the sound of Lan's sharp, jagged breathing. Finally, she whispered an address, a street name in the industrial district, a place where the city's heart stopped beating and its lungs filled with soot. Min didn't say goodbye. He hung up and sprinted toward his car, the silver sports car that had been bought with my blood. Every time he shifted gears, every time the engine roared, he felt a sick, oily shame. This car was a piece of my land. This leather was my father's sweat. He drove like a madman, weaving through traffic, his eyes blurred by tears and rain. When he finally reached the address, he hit the brakes so hard the car fishtailed. He was in a neighborhood of crumbling brick and rusted iron. The Grand Palace was a universe away. Here, the only light came from flickering street lamps and the glowing signs of 24-hour laundromats. He found the building, a narrow, leaning structure that looked like it was held together by nothing but habit and grime. He ran inside, the hallway smelling of stale cooking oil and damp wood. He found the door to the basement apartment. It wasn't even a real door. It was a heavy piece of plywood with a rusted lock. He pounded on it, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Dad! Dad, please! Open the door! It's me! It's Min!" There was no answer. Only the sound of a distant radiator, hissing like a snake. A neighbor, an old woman in a tattered bathrobe, opened her door a crack, her eyes suspicious and tired. "He's gone, Sonny," she croaked. "Left about an hour ago. carried a single suitcase and a heavy heart. Didn't even take his deposit back from the landlord. Just said he didn't belong here anymore. Min pushed past her, ignoring her protests, and nudged the plywood door. It wasn't locked. He stepped into the room where I had lived for the last decade. He stopped in the center of the floor, his breath hitching in his throat. The room was no larger than the walk-in closet in his penthouse. There was a single cot, a small wooden table, and a hot plate. But it wasn't the poverty that broke him. It was the walls. The walls were covered in photos. Not photos of me or of my life, but of him. There was a blurry picture of his middle school graduation, a newspaper clipping of his law school honors, a grainy photo of him getting into his car, taken from a distance. I had been a stalker of his happiness, a silent witness to a life I was forbidden to join. On the small table there was a stack of ledgers. Min opened the top one. It was a meticulously kept record of every cent I had earned and every cent I had sent to him. Beside it sat a small bowl containing a half-eaten crust of bread and a cup of cold tea. This was the luxurious life I had lived while he was drinking champagne. He saw a small framed photo on the nightstand, the only one where we were together. He was 5 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a village festival. We were both laughing, our faces smeared with red bean paste. He remembered that day. He remembered how safe he felt, how he thought I was the tallest, strongest man in the world. He realized that I had spent the next 20 years proving him right, not with muscles, but with a monumental quiet strength that could move mountains of debt and shame. He collapsed onto the small cot, the smell of me, oil, old paper, and cheap soap filling his senses. He looked at the cracked watch in his hand, and then at the empty room. He had been so worried about being small, about being poor, that he had missed the most magnificent thing in his life. He was the son of a king who wore a mechanic's uniform, and he had sent that king into exile. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the silence of the basement. "I'm so sorry, Dad." But the room didn't forgive him. The photos on the wall didn't move. I was gone. I had retreated into the vast, anonymous world, a man who had finally finished his job and had nothing left to lose. Min stood up, his face hardening. He knew what he had to do. If I had spent 20 years building a life for him, he would spend the rest of his life tearing down the lies that had separated us. He walked out of the apartment, leaving the door wide open, and headed back to the hotel. He wasn't going back to celebrate. He was going back to finish what I had started with that letter. The return of Min to the Grand Palace Hotel was not the return of the groom, but the arrival of a reckoning. The rain had soaked his tuxedo to a heavy charcoal gray, and his eyes carried a terrifying clarity. As he stepped back into the ballroom, the whispers reached a fever pitch. Lan rushed toward him, her face a mask of panicked composure. She tried to grab his arm, to pull him toward a private corner where they could manage the catastrophe. But Min brushed her off with a coldness that made her flinch. He walked straight to the microphone on the band's stage, the feedback echoing through the silent hall like a gunshot. "Ladies and gentlemen," Min's voice was steady, amplified by the speakers until it vibrated in the very bones of everyone present. "You came here to celebrate a union of two successful families, but you have been witnessing a performance. This wedding was paid for by a man who isn't in this room because he was kicked out. He was kicked out because his hands were dirty from working the jobs that Mr. Victor Huang was too refined to handle." He looked directly at his father-in-law, a man whose reputation was built on integrity. The dowry, the investments, the lifestyle, it was all a fraud. My mother and Victor Huang used a humble man's life savings to paint a picture of wealth that didn't exist. I am not the man you think I am. I am the son of a mechanic, a man I just treated like a stranger. I cannot marry into your family under a false name and a stolen legacy. The shock in the room was palpable. The bride's father stood up, his face reddening as he signaled for his daughter to come to his side. The wedding was over. The alliance was shattered. But Min didn't stop there. He turned to Victor, who was slumped in his chair, the weight of his exposure finally crushing him. Tomorrow, I am beginning the process of liquidating everything. The house, the cars, the investments, whatever is left will be sold. We are going to pay back every cent that was stolen from my father's life. If there is nothing left for you, Victor, then you can finally learn how it feels to work for a living. Lan let out a cry of protest, but Min was already walking away. He felt a strange sense of peace as he stripped off the expensive cufflinks and tossed them onto the floor. They were just bits of metal. They weren't his. Nothing in this room was his. He walked out of the hotel for the final time, leaving behind the wreckage of a 20-year lie. He didn't have a plan and he didn't have a home. But for the first time in his life, he had the truth. The following weeks were a blur of legal battles and bitter confrontations. Lan and Victor fought him at every turn, but the evidence in the letter was irrefutable. The bank records I had kept so meticulously were the nails in the coffin of their charade. The public scandal was immense. The Hoang fortune became a cautionary tale in the city's social circles. Victor was forced into a humiliating bankruptcy, and Lan, unable to face the loss of her status, fled to a distant relative's home, still blaming me for ruining their lives. She couldn't understand that I hadn't ruined anything. I had simply stopped holding up the ceiling. Min moved into the same basement apartment I had occupied. He wanted to feel the cold. He wanted to understand the silence. He took a job at a local shipping yard, the kind of place where men with grease-stained hands worked until their muscles screamed. Every morning he looked at the wall of photos I had left behind. He looked at the 5-year-old on my shoulders and promised that boy he would find the man who had carried him. He spent his nights at the bus station, the train depot, and the local shelters, showing my picture to anyone who would look. "Have you seen this man?" he would ask, his voice tired but persistent. "He's my father," he would add, no longer with a whisper of shame, but with a surge of pride that burned hotter than his exhaustion. But the city was vast, and I had a 20-year head start on being invisible. I had mastered the art of being a shadow. Every lead Min followed turned into a dead end. He went to our old village, but the land had been paved over by a shopping mall. He went to the factory where I used to work, but the old foreman had passed away. It was as if I had truly evaporated, leaving behind only the cracked watch and a legacy of silent sacrifice. Min's life became a pilgrimage of penance. He lived on the bare minimum, sending whatever he saved to a charity for aging laborers, doing in my name what I had done for his. He began to realize that I hadn't just given him money. I had given him a roadmap of how to be a man. A man isn't defined by the silk of his tie, but by the weight he is willing to carry for the people he loves. And as the months turned into a year, Min became a man I would have been proud to know. But the one thing he couldn't find was the one thing he needed to hear. A voice that didn't come from a memory. He didn't know that 300 miles away, in a quiet coastal town, I was watching the waves, finally at rest, unaware that the son who had chased me away was now spending his life trying to bring me home. The sea has a way of swallowing the noise of the past. In the small coastal village of Van Phong, I found a silence that the city could never offer. I took a job mending fishing nets and painting the hulls of the old wooden trawlers. My hands remained calloused, and my back still ached at the end of the day. But there was no weight of expectation here. No one knew me as the poor father or the mechanic from the basement. To the locals, I was just Old Nam, a man of few words who worked hard and spent his evenings watching the horizon where the gray water met the gray sky. I had found a strange kind of peace in my exile, though it was a peace built on the ashes of my heart. I often sat on the pier after the sun went down, the salty air cooling the fire in my lungs. I would reach for my wrist out of habit, only to remember that the watch was gone, left on a cold marble floor in a city that had chewed me up and spat me out. I didn't regret leaving. The truth was out, and once the truth is spoken, there is no going back to the comfort of a lie. I imagined Min in his new life, likely still angry, likely still surrounded by the riches I had helped provide. I hoped the letter hadn't broken him, but I knew it had to be done. A man cannot build a home on a foundation of sand and expect it to stand the storm. I lived simply, sleeping in a small hut near the docks, my only companions the gulls and the rhythmic thrum of the tides. I was waiting for the end of my story, content to be forgotten. But 300 miles away, Min was refusing to let the story end. He had become a ghost in his own right. The polished, arrogant young lawyer was gone, replaced by a man who looked 10 years older than he was. He had sold the sports car. He had sold the designer watches. He lived out of a backpack and a beat-up truck he had bought with his first 3 months of wages from the shipping yard. He had a map of the coastline pinned to the dashboard, marked with red circles where he had already searched. He was following a trail of whispers, stories of an old man with steady hands and a silent gaze who moved from town to town. Min's search wasn't just about finding me. It was about finding himself. Every person he talked to, every laborer he worked beside, taught him a lesson I had tried to show him for years. He learned the value of a shared cigarette in the cold, the dignity of a job well done, and the crushing weight of regret. He visited every shipyard, every small-town garage, and every boarding house along the northern coast. He was looking for a man who didn't want to be found, a man who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of being invisible. "Why are you doing this, kid?" an old foreman asked him one afternoon as Min showed my photo for the 100th time. If he wanted to be found, he'd have left a breadcrumb. Some men just want to fade away. But he didn't fade away, Min replied, his voice raspy from exhaustion. He was pushed away, and I was the one who pushed him. I don't need him to come back to the city. I just need him to know that I finally see him. The foreman looked at the photo, a picture of me from years ago, leaning against a rusted engine. "Try Van Fong," the man said, spitting a bit of tobacco onto the dirt. "There's a group of old-timers there who do the net mending. They don't ask questions and they don't like visitors. Sounds like your man's kind of place." Min didn't wait. He drove through the night, the headlights of his truck cutting through the thick coastal fog. His heart was a frantic drum in his chest. He was terrified that he would arrive too late, that the years of toil and the heartbreak of the wedding had finally taken their toll on me. He reached Van Fong as the first light of dawn was breaking over the water, turning the spray into liquid gold. The village was waking up, the smell of wood smoke and drying fish filling the air. He parked near the docks and began to walk, his eyes scanning every face, every hunched back, every pair of weathered hands. I was there, sitting on a low stool near the edge of the pier, my fingers moving mechanically through the nylon mesh of a net. I felt a presence before I saw him. A shadow fell over my work, blocking the morning sun. I didn't look up at first. "The nets will be ready by noon," I said, my voice gravelly from disuse. "Tell the captain to wait. I'm not here for the nets, Dad." The needle froze in my hand. The voice was familiar, yet different. It lacked the sharp edge of the man in the tuxedo. It was deeper, softer, and filled with a trembling vulnerability I hadn't heard since he was a child. I slowly raised my head. Standing before me was a man I barely recognized. He was thin, his skin tanned and roughened by the elements. He was wearing a simple work shirt and heavy boots, and his eyes were brimming with a grief so profound it mirrored my own. He didn't look like a prince. He looked like my son. We stood there for a long time, the only sound the crying of the gulls and the water lapping against the pilings. The distance between us was only a few feet, but it felt like a canyon carved by 20 years of silence and lies. He didn't move toward me, as if he were afraid I would vanish if he got too close. He just stood there, letting the morning light reveal everything he had become, and everything he had lost. The needle fell from my numb fingers, clattering onto the salt-stained wood of the pier. I wanted to stand, to reach out, to run, but my legs felt like they were rooted into the very timber of the dock. I looked at Min, and for the first time in 2 decades, I didn't see the investment I had made, or the ghost of my failed marriage. I saw a man who had walked through the same fire that had consumed me. The silk was gone. The arrogance had been burned away, leaving behind a raw, honest humanity that I thought had been lost forever. "How did you find me?" I managed to whisper, my voice cracking under the weight of the sea air. "I looked for the man who wasn't there," Min said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I looked for the gap you left behind. It's a very large gap, Dad. It covers the whole city." He took a hesitant step forward, then another, until he was standing just inches away. He looked down at my hands, the scarred knuckles, the deep-set grease that no amount of sea salt could ever truly scrub away. I read the letter. I saw the records. I saw everything. I looked away, toward the horizon. "You weren't supposed to find that until I was gone. It wasn't meant to be a weapon, Min. It was just the truth. I didn't want you to live your whole life believing a lie, even if the lie was comfortable." "Comfortable?" Min let out a short, jagged laugh that sounded more like a sob. "I was living in a house built of glass, throwing stones at the only person who was actually holding the walls up. There is no comfort in that. Not anymore." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden box. It was battered now, the finish dulled by the rain of that wedding night. He opened it, revealing the silver watch. He had had the glass replaced, and the metal had been polished, until it shone like a mirror in the morning sun. "I brought this back. I didn't have the right to keep it then. I don't know if I have the right now. But it belongs to our family. Not the Huangs. To us." I looked at the watch and then at him. "There is no us anymore, Min. I gave you everything so you could be free of people like me. You had a life. You had a future." "I had nothing!" Min suddenly shouted, the sound startling a flock of gulls into the air. "I had a name that wasn't mine, and a fortune that belonged to a ghost. Do you think I could stay in that ballroom? Do you think I could marry a woman who didn't know who I really was?" I walked away from all of it, Dad. The money, the title, the family. It's all gone. I liquidated Victor's assets. I paid back the creditors. Whatever was left I put into a trust for the men you worked with at the factory. I'm just like you now. I have nothing but my hands and my name. I felt a surge of panic in my chest. "You threw it all away? For what? I spent 20 years in the dark so you could walk in the light." "You spent 20 years in the dark so I could be a monster," Min countered, falling to his knees on the pier so he was eye level with me. "I don't want the light if it's fueled by your blood. I want to be the man in the photo, Dad. The boy on your shoulders. I want to be the son of Nam, the mechanic, not the son of Victor, the thief." He grabbed my hand, his grip firm and desperate. "I didn't come here to ask you to come back to the city. There's nothing left for us there. I came here to ask if I could sit on this pier and mend nets with you. I came to ask if you could teach me how to be a man. Because I realized on my wedding night that I hadn't even started learning." I looked into his eyes and saw the truth. He wasn't playing a part. He wasn't seeking a temporary absolution so he could go back to his high-rise apartment. He had truly dismantled his life to find the pieces of mine. For 20 years I had thought that my sacrifice was the money. I thought the gift was the wealth. But standing there on that pier, I realized that the greatest sacrifice I ever made was letting him believe I didn't love him. And the greatest gift he could give me wasn't an apology. It was his presence. I reached out with a trembling hand and touched his face. His skin was cold from the morning mist, but his eyes were burning. I felt the decades of resentment, loneliness, and silent toil begin to dissolve, washed away by a tide stronger than the one hitting the shore. I didn't say I forgave him. Some things are too big for words. Instead, I picked up the needle and the nylon mesh. "The knots have to be tight," I said, my voice steadier now. "If the knot is loose, the whole net is useless. Sit down, Min. The tide is coming in and the boats won't wait for us." He sat. He didn't say another word. He just watched my hands, learning the rhythm, learning the work, learning the quiet dignity of a life that isn't for sale. We sat together as the sun rose higher, two men among the fishermen, mending the holes in the nets and the holes in our lives. The world thought we were nothing, just two laborers on a crumbling dock. But for the first time in my life, I felt like a king. The months turned into a year, and the seasons in Van Phong bled into one another with a gentle, salt-sprayed rhythm. Min stayed. He didn't just stay for a week or a month to soothe his conscience. He built a life in the cracks of the one I had found. We lived in a small cottage further up the cliff, away from the spray of the high tide. Every morning we walked down to the docks together. The local fishermen, who had once viewed me as a solitary shadow, now greeted us as a pair. They called us the Two Nems, a title that brought a quiet smile to my son's face every time he heard it. Min's transformation was physical. His hands became as rough as mine, his skin deepened to a dark bronze, and the frantic, hollow look in his eyes was replaced by a calm, steady focus. He was a quick study. He learned how to read the weather by the color of the clouds, and how to fix a diesel engine by the sound of its stutter. Sometimes, as I watched him bent over a rusted motor, his brow furrowed in concentration, I saw the little boy who used to watch me work in our village. The cycle had been broken, then mended, but the scar remained, a reminder of the price we had both paid for the truth. We never talked about Lan or Victor. They belonged to a different world, a world of shadows and mirrors that we had both escaped. We heard rumors occasionally that Victor had vanished to avoid his debts, and that Lan was living a bitter, quiet life in the city. But their names held no power over us anymore. The wealth they had coveted was a cage, and by losing it, Min had finally found his freedom. He didn't miss the galas or the champagne. He told me once, while we were sharing a simple meal of grilled fish and rice, that he had never slept as soundly as he did on the thin mattress in our cottage. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold, Min sat on the porch and pulled the silver watch from his pocket. He hadn't worn it yet. He kept it in its box, a sacred relic of our journey. He handed it to me. "I think it's time, Dad," he said softly. "The glass is fixed. The heart is beating. It shouldn't be in a box anymore." I took the watch, the metal warm from his palm. I looked at the face, the same face my father had looked at, and his father before him. It was a witness to time, to struggle, and, finally, to reconciliation. I didn't put it on my own wrist. Instead, I took Min's hand and buckled the strap around his arm. The silver looked right against his tanned, hard-working skin. "It was always meant for you," I said. "Not for the groom in the tuxedo, but for the man sitting here with me. Wear it to remember that time is the only thing we truly own. Don't waste it on people who want you to be someone else." Min looked at the watch for a long time, the ticking of the gears the only sound between us. He didn't thank me with words. He didn't have to. The bond between us was no longer forged in money or duty, but in a shared understanding of what it means to be a man. We had lost everything the world considers valuable, yet as we sat there in the fading light, we knew we were the richest men in Van Phong. The letter I had left at the wedding was the end of a lie, but this life was the beginning of a legacy. I knew that I wouldn't live forever. The years of labor had left their mark, and my breath came a little shorter each winter. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew that when I finally laid down my tools for the last time, I wouldn't be leaving behind a ghost. I would be leaving behind a son who knew his father's name. A man who understood that love isn't something you buy, it's something you earn. One stitch of the net at a time. As the stars began to poke through the velvet sky, we walked back inside. The light from our small lamp flickered in the window, a tiny beacon on the edge of the vast, dark sea. We were just two men, simple and forgotten by the world, but we were home. And in the end, that was the only gift that ever mattered. Thank you for walking this emotional journey with us today on Dr. Harmony. This story reminds us that while the truth can be a bitter pill, it is the only thing that can truly set us free. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to Dr. Harmony and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of these life-changing stories. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep sharing the truth. Until next time, stay grounded, stay honest, and cherish the ones who truly love you.